Hey, Hollyhock, you still haven't returned my last call, which is fine. I know you're going back to school soon, and you should know I won't be there. So if you were worried you'd have to see me, you won't. But I would love to talk.
Hey, hello, how do you do? Shady Doorags here. Before the finale of Bojack Horseman, I predicted that Bojack's friends would have to choose between staying with him or abandoning him. However, whenever I was asked, what about Hollyhock, I always stated that it was obvious. Bojack's relationship with her was too strong. Since Hollyhock was told from the beginning that Bojack was a horrible person, and since she decided to accept him, warts and all, there wasn't anything that could possibly break their bond.
Isn't that cute? But it's wrong!
Yeah, I could not have been more embarrassingly wrong. Hollyhock not only winds up leaving Bojack, but she's the first one to do it. Now, am I salty that the show once again decided to prove me wrong? I don't get salty. But I did want to talk about something that made me uncomfortable with this decision. I proposed a question to you all. Did Hollyhock make the right choice in cutting herself off from Bojack? To be clear, I'm not talking about whether it was good for the story. In fact, for this video, let's assume it's the best decision the story could have made. I'm asking, was this a choice that any person in Hollyhock's shoes should have made? As per usual, I have my opinions, so get your angry comments ready. But first, a quick recap. In Season 6, Hollyhock is approached by Pete Repeat during her winter break, who informs her about how Bojack helped his ex-girlfriend Maddie get alcohol poisoning. After the winter break is over, Bojack begins teaching at Hollyhock's school. He thinks this will allow him to spend more time with his sister, but at every opportunity, Hollyhock avoids him, hinting that this was caused by what Pete Repeat told her. Eventually, Bojack confronts Hollyhock about her behavior. Hollyhock declares that Bojack has invaded a space she found personal, and that while she's fine if he stays, they should take things slow. She also alludes that she no longer loves Bojack. This would be the last time we see Hollyhock. Bojack's past about Sarah Lynn is revealed to the world, first in the news article written about him, then in the two-part interview. As a result, Bojack is portrayed to the world as someone who hurts young women and isn't going to stop anytime soon. During the aftermath, Bojack tries to get in touch with Hollyhock, but she doesn't answer his calls. Eventually, Bojack does get a response, but it's in the form of a letter. We never get to see what the letter says. For all we know, it's a drunk recipe for bundt cake. But given that Hollyhock has disconnected her phone, and that Bojack falls back into drinking after reading it, we can conclude that it's informing Bojack that Hollyhock no longer wants anything to do with him. Alright, so the first place I want to start with this discussion is Pete Repeat's telling of the story of how Maddie got alcohol poisoning. Pay attention to it and you'll see that he ignores certain details and exaggerates others. For example, Pete Repeat doesn't mention that Maddie already had alcohol before Bojack purchased the bourbon. He doesn't mention that Bojack only gave them the bourbon because he didn't want them getting sick or hungover. And Pete Repeat explains the situation as if they had no choice but to drink.
This guy bought us bourbon and practically forced us to drink it.
Oh, it burns.
Yeah, because it's not a juice box.
You want some? No thanks.
Sadie.
I'm driving.
Now, there is a reason Pete Repeat is telling the story this way. It's very likely that he's not lying, he just remembers the situation differently because of his role in it.
Because at some point, I realized it wasn't the alcohol's fault, or Maddie's fault, or my fault. It was just some dude, you know?
In order for Pete Repeat's mind to accept what happened, it created a scapegoat for him, placing all the blame on Bojack. That way, whenever these intense feelings about the situation build up inside of him, he can focus those feelings on Bojack. Pete Repeat's version of the story over-exaggerates the fact that he, Maddie, and Penny were victims in this situation. Now let's make something stupidly clear here. Pete Repeat and Maddie were the victims of what happened that night. A, they were kids and Bojack was an adult. B, Bojack is the one who bought them the bourbon. C, while yes, there are some teens out there who can handle their alcohol, Bojack was neither their parent nor did he know any of them well enough to make that decision. And D, Bojack used his influence to get them to lie to the paramedics. Being a victim, however, does not mean you have no responsibility of the situation. It just means any responsibility you might have is negligible. A kid can say no when an adult is offering them alcohol. But that fact is negligible in most cases since we recognize kids are inexperienced with life and are easily influenced. The responsibility would therefore fall onto the adult despite the kid's compliance. So why is any of this important? Well, there are many cases where people try to exaggerate certain aspects of a situation, and doing so causes a much bigger outcry than the normal truth. Conversely, learning about what actually happened can reduce those emotions. This is part of the reason why our citrus president won his first election. People exaggerated what he did, hoping to elicit certain responses. But when the truth came out, it made him appear sympathetic. Sure, he wasn't the nicest guy, but he wasn't as bad as certain stories made him out to be. And that's how I feel about Pete Repeat's version of what happened. Even though what Bojack did was bad, Hollyhock's perspective of it from the start was skewed to make him look worse than he actually was. Would Hollyhock have had a different mindset if she could watch the story play out in front of her own eyes, or if she was told an objective perspective of the story by someone who didn't care about perpetrators and victims? Quick little side note, because I know someone's going to bring this up. There is no evidence that anything before Pete Repeat's story had any influence on Hollyhock. The last time Hollyhock was with Bojack, they were fine. Before that, in season 5, he was actually a creep to her, yet she still loved him and was even willing to take time off from school to help him deal with his addiction.
I could take a semester off if you need someone.
No, God, no. Stay in school.
Okay. I love you.
Pete Repeat's story, however, is not the only factor influencing Hollyhock. She mentions that she's reading Gender Trouble, which, yes, is a real book that exists. It seems that Hollyhock is taking a gender studies course, more than likely caused by what she heard about Bojack. If you're not familiar with gender studies, the subject has a reputation for being the backbone of things like feminism and typical social justice warrior mentality. Taking a course like that would absolutely continue to push Hollyhock's perspective of Bojack in a negative direction. The point I'm trying to make is this. Hollyhock's decision of distancing herself from Bojack was made purely from a perspective that was fueled by negativity. Objectively, Bojack could have done nothing wrong, and Hollyhock still would have been upset at him because the perspective she experienced told her to be. Moving on, let's take a look at Hollyhock's life after learning what Bojack did. She immediately takes up rugby, and from Bojack's conversation with Tawny, this is a response to her hearing Pete Repeat's story.
Do you understand this rugby thing?
Honestly, no. She came back from winter break super aggro, but that's Hollyhock, right? Suddenly she decides this is what I'm all about now, and everyone else just has to get on board.
Using context clues, my headcanon is that Hollyhock, at this point in time, was trying to figure things out. She was uncomfortable with what Bojack did, but wasn't ready to completely reject him or even confront him about it. She might have taken the gender studies course specifically to help her come to a conclusion of what she should do. In the meantime, she wanted an escape from her feelings about her big brother, so she was using rugby as a distressing coping mechanism. But that doesn't work as a distraction from someone when said someone decides to come to literally every game and cheer his head off. Hollyhock tries to hint to Bojack that she needs a little space.
Don't feel like you have to come to these things if it's not your thing.
Bojack doesn't take the hint, however, and instead goes full proud brother, supporting Hollyhock in her new hobby. The thing she's using to get her mind off of Bojack is now the place where she sees him the most. Naturally, she winds up quitting, and when Bojack mentions that he wants to find some other activity to do with her, she lashes out at him. It's not until Hollyhock misses Bojack's showcase where there's finally some communication. Bojack wants to know why Hollyhock has been avoiding him. Because of the rugby thing, Hollyhock's mind steers her in the wrong direction. She doesn't address the root problem, that being the Maddie story, but goes back to the latest problem she had, Bojack being in her space when she doesn't want him there. This is, in my opinion, the biggest opportunity loss for Hollyhock. Had she, at this moment, told Bojack what was truly bothering her, the rest of their relationship could have gone differently. As it stands, this winds up being the last time Bojack and Hollyhock will ever talk. Hollyhock presumably sees Bojack's interviews and, thanks to the second one, is made to believe that Bojack hurts young women and does not change, just like the rest of the world. This is the closest Hollyhock will get to Bojack's point of view, and it can hardly be described as fair. We, the audience, know the interview has an agenda, but the audience within the show doesn't.
You had sex with the president of your fan club. You had sex with your agent's assistant. You party with underage girls. You don't see a pattern here?
It's not a pattern.
Do you enjoy having power over women?
I don't even know what that means.
So, knowing everything we do now, let's re-ask the question. Did Hollyhock make the right choice in cutting herself off from Bojack? Well, let me ask this. Do you think someone who commits a crime should be punished for that crime? I'm going to take a wild guess and assume yes. But should said criminal be punished without a fair trial? If they committed a crime, why does it matter if they have a trial? Doesn't a trial just mean that guilty people who are skilled enough to manipulate the system get away free? These are questions that have been answered in depth throughout time, but to make a long story short, a fair trial is the best way to remain objective. Without one, it's too easy to punish the potentially innocent. Even if there's a chance that a guilty person could go free, a fair trial is still the best course of action. Bojack, in regards to Hollyhock, got the equivalent of a punishment without a fair trial. Hollyhock may or may not have made the right choice, but what she didn't make was an informed choice. Her perspective from the start was skewed against Bojack. A way to counter this would have been for her to communicate with Bojack the problem she had with him and get his perspective on all of it. But she never does this. Hey look, Shady's talking about empathy and getting everyone's perspective. It must be a day that ends in a Y. It's incredibly disappointing that Hollyhock was so easily swayed by Bojack's cancellation. Bojack, at the time, was better than he had ever been. He was not only staying sober and staying out of trouble, but he was helping people. Bojack became a positive on the world. Yet Hollyhock talks to him as if it's highly likely he's going to repeat the situation with Maddie.
Sounds fun. Can I join you?
I don't think you should. It's a bar and there'll be alcohol there.
That's okay.
And young girls.
What's that have to do with anything?
Nothing. Just stating a fact.
She also ignores the fact that Bojack regrets the life he lived and directly tells Hollyhock he does not want to go back.
You had a life before you met me.
I don't want that life. That person, that's not who I am.
Let's compare Hollyhock's situation to Diane's. In the last episode, it's heavily implied that Diane is going to remove Bojack from her life, similar to Hollyhock. But there are several factors that make what Diane does more fair. For one, the offense Bojack has committed, Diane directly experiences. There's no secondhand information that skews the perspective. Second, Diane communicates with Bojack. She lets him know what the problem is and asks why he would do something so horrible to her, to which he cannot give an acceptable answer. Not only that, but she explains to him exactly how much his actions hurt her and why they weren't tolerable. Finally, there is no visible sign that Bojack won't do this to her again in the future. In my opinion, what Diane does is brave. She confronts someone she cares about directly and explains openly how it affects her and why she can't have it in her life. What Hollyhock does, oh boy, get those angry comments ready, here it comes, is cowardly. Yes, it takes bravery on some level to leave someone you care about, but doing so by a letter, so you don't have to look at them while you're doing it, so you can't hear their response, so you don't have to remind yourself that they're human and can change, is denying yourself doubt that should be present. To do this without hearing their side of the story is giving into your fear. It's the equivalent of changing your relationship status online and ghosting your significant other instead of just breaking up with them. You hope they go away and you can move on without giving them any closure. Now, there are some exceptions, of course. If, for example, you're afraid your loved one might physically hurt you, then it's much more difficult to justify a face-to-face meeting. But I don't think this applies to Hollyhock. She never seemed afraid of Bojack, just ashamed. Once again, I want to make myself bird crashing into a window clear. Should Hollyhock have left Bojack? I can't say no. Everyone has their limits to a relationship, and if Bojack crossed Hollyhock's line, she has every right to remove him from her life. But maybe that was the wrong question to ask in the first place. Perhaps the more important question is, was Hollyhock's decision fair? Not only to Bojack, but to herself. Hollyhock loved her brother once upon a time. He made her happy to the point that she would drop what she was doing just to hang out with him. By separating herself like this, she's losing a very close loved one who wanted nothing but to spend time with her, who went out of his way to take an interest in her hobbies, who was happy by the mere sight of her. Is it fair to deny herself a chance to rekindle that relationship because of what others have presented? People are entitled to separate themselves from those they disapprove of. But when those they disapprove of are loved ones, I don't think it's too much to ask that all sides be heard before the decision is made. This has been Shady Doorags. So long, farewell, Auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye.
If this is too weird for you, I don't have to come back next semester. I can get a job somewhere else.
Tani says you're a really good teacher.
She did? Huh. I thought you were in a fight.
Yeah, but I still love her.
Are we in a fight?
Yeah, but